My life, once defined by its calm, happy rhythm, had been shattered by an unbearable truth. The man I loved, my husband, had betrayed me. Worse still, it wasn't just anyone, my best friend had been part of that betrayal. The irony of it all was that I had pretended to be a room attendant, putting myself in the exact place where the truth would hit me with brutal clarity. I had always thought of my life as simple yet filled with an unmistakable happiness. That feeling, though understated, was everything I had built my world around. I had created a family, a unit that, despite the many challenges, felt whole. It was a complicated, beautiful mess, but it was mine. And at the center of it all stood James, my 39-year-old husband, charming, full of life, a man who meant everything to me. Yet our journey together had not been a smooth one. He entered our marriage carrying the weight of his past, a son from his first marriage, and emotional scars that had yet to heal. His ex-wife had been entangled in her own battles, forcing James to be the protector, to shield their son Lucas from a painful reality. When James and I got married 7 years ago, I opened my heart to him and Lucas. I embraced Lucas as my own, despite the complexities of blending families. Now, at 9, Lucas had become a quiet, introspective boy. His laughter, though rare, was like a spark that lit up our home, even if only for a fleeting moment. Lucas lived with us full-time, a living reminder of the life James had before me, a past I had willingly stepped into. I loved Lucas as though he were my own flesh and blood, and in many ways, he was. Over time, our bond strengthened, despite the adjustment struggles and the silent boundaries that existed between us. Then, 3 years after our marriage, James and I welcomed our own son, Ethan. With his father's eyes and a smile that could melt anyone's heart, Ethan embodied the love and joy we shared. At just 5 years old, Ethan was the heartbeat of our household. His infectious energy and playful nature often pulled Lucas into his games, and Lucas, with the patience of someone far older, indulged him without a complaint. Our home, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, echoed with the usual family chaos, school runs, soccer games, and weekend family dinners full of laughter. James, well known in our community for his local work, never let his public life interfere with our private one. If anything, it added a sense of pride to our home. We had learned how to navigate the pressures of his career, finding a balance between the public and private spheres. Our days were filled with more laughter than arguments, a harmony I cherished deeply. Claire, my best friend since college, had always been a fixture in my life. She was married to a wealthy businessman who, though providing her with luxury, could never give her the emotional fulfillment she craved. She often confided in me, sharing the frustrations of her marriage, especially when it came to the intimacy she felt was lacking. Claire was always open, always honest, and always a comforting presence in my life. Her visits were frequent, and she loved my boys as though they were her own, despite not having children of her own. Her role in our family felt natural, a choice both of us had made, our bond unbroken by the passage of time. James, my rock, had always been a loving, attentive husband. He showered me with affection, surprise flowers, sweet notes left on the fridge. His love was consistent, unmistakable. But then, the shifts began. Subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. There were the evenings when James would come home, his face not tired from work but clouded with something else, something darker. I would ask if everything was okay, and he would give me a tight smile, brushing it off as just a rough day. But his eyes, once so full of life, now avoided mine, and that brief flash of unease planted seeds of doubt in my mind. There were also the texts. One night, as James typed away on his phone beside me, I glanced over, wondering who he was texting so late. He quickly angled the screen away, claiming it was just an urgent work email. But something in the way he said it, too calm, too practiced, set off an alarm in my mind. Yet, I silenced those thoughts, telling myself I was being overly suspicious. With Claire, the changes were even more evident, though hidden in ways that only hindsight could reveal. She had always been open, vibrant, sharing every detail of her life with brutal honesty. But over time, her energy faded. She became distant, her laughter less frequent, her visits shorter. I remember one lunch, when she seemed more distracted than usual, constantly checking her phone. Jokingly, I asked if she had a secret lover, but the way her eyes flickered, a brief flash of guilt, made me stop. She quickly shifted the conversation, her discomfort palpable, but I let it pass. Our conversations, once filled with deep connection, became shallow. Claire asked about my life, my family, but it felt like she was merely going through the motions. I would share stories of James and the kids, not knowing that each word I spoke was like a thorn in her side. Looking back, I can trace the moments when her discomfort was most evident, especially when I spoke of James with pride and affection. One evening, the four of us, James, Claire, her husband, and I, had dinner together at our house. It was a seemingly ordinary evening, but there was something off. I noticed the forced laughter, the brief, knowing looks exchanged between Claire and James, looks that were quickly hidden, but not quickly enough. It was as if they were both actors in a play, each trying to maintain the facade of normalcy. After they left, the air in the house felt heavy, charged with the unspoken. James became unusually quiet, retreating into himself in a way I couldn't understand. That night, when I asked him what was wrong, he brushed me off, mumbling about being tired. But his eyes avoided mine, and I could see the tension in his jaw. It was clear something was wrong, but I couldn't break through the wall he had put up. These tiny cracks, this growing distance, were the first signs. They were the pieces of a puzzle that I was only now starting to see clearly. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. My husband, my best friend, had betrayed me. Cuts deeper than anything I've ever felt. It shakes the very foundation of everything I thought I knew, leaving me to wonder, how could I have missed the signs? They were there, so obvious, painting a vivid picture of betrayal right before my very eyes. It all started like any other Tuesday, bright and warm, with the soft hum of life filling the house. Ethan was playing in the living room, his laughter light and carefree, while I busied myself with the routine task of organizing the house. My phone buzzed, and I reached for it without thinking. I expected it to be a reminder or maybe a message from a family member. But when I glanced down, my stomach dropped. It wasn't either of those. It was an anonymous text, just a hotel name and room number. The sender was unknown, and an immediate wave of dread washed over me. Why would anyone send me this? A mistake? Or something darker? My heart raced, fear and confusion mingling with the cold sting of betrayal. I couldn't shake it. Despite every ounce of logic telling me to dismiss it, doubt had been planted. I had to know the truth. I had to go. I asked the neighbor to watch Ethan, mumbling something about running an errand I didn't even have. My hands trembled as I got into the car, the address from the message burning in my mind with every passing mile. Each heartbeat was a drumbeat, louder and more frantic. When I pulled into the hotel parking lot, my breath came in shallow gasps. Each step toward the door felt heavier, and I could feel my legs threatening to collapse beneath me. Standing before the door, my hand hovered over the handle, every fiber of my being telling me to turn back, to run far, far away from whatever waited behind that door. But I couldn't. I had to know. The fear gripped me, but the truth was more powerful. I knocked softly, barely a sound. "Come in." It was CLA's voice. Casual. Irritated. "Why are you taking so long? Help me clean up my spilled wine." My heart slammed in my chest as I slowly pushed the door open. I fought to keep my composure, pretending to be a hotel employee, but the scene that greeted me was anything but ordinary. It was a nightmare unfolding in front of my eyes. James stood at the balcony, his back to the room, lost in a phone call, unaware of what I was about to witness. And there was CLA, sprawled on the bed, a glass of wine toppled over on the nightstand, the red liquid staining the pristine sheets. I bent down, pretending to clean, my fingers trembling as I gripped the cloth. CLA was still speaking, completely oblivious. "You know, he's the only one who can satisfy me," she said, her voice laced with something that made my skin crawl. "I've always been so jealous of her, living such a perfect life," she added, bitterly. Her words froze me, and the cloth slipped from my hand, forgotten. The sting of her betrayal, her mocking tone, sliced through the silence. She spoke of her husband, calling him weak, inadequate. The cruelty was casual, almost as though she was talking about the weather. The ease with which she dismissed her vows. It was too much. I stood there, still as stone, my disguise slipping away, my heart shattering. Then, James turned from the balcony. The sight of him smiling at CLA, his eyes softening with affection, a tenderness directed at her, not me, was the final blow. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The room spun as my stomach twisted. I had to get out, had to flee before they saw me, before everything I thought I knew came crashing down. I stumbled out of the room, my legs unsteady beneath me. Outside, the cool air did nothing to soothe the burning shame, anger, and sorrow gnawing at my insides. I found myself heaving, vomiting in the bushes outside the hotel, my body trying to purge the pain that twisted in my gut. The drive back home was a blur, my thoughts consumed by the image of them together. How long had this been going on? How could they betray me like this? How could they destroy everything we had? I pulled into the driveway, the sound of Ethan's laughter echoing in the background, so painfully normal, so at odds with the chaos inside me. How could I reconcile this perfect little world with the betrayal that had shattered it? That night, after Ethan was tucked into bed, I sat alone in the dark, waiting for James to come home. The minutes dragged on, each one an eternity. When he finally walked through the door, his face faltered at the sight of me. He saw it, the redness in my eyes, the emptiness on my face. I didn't even need to speak for him to know something was wrong. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice dripping with concern, but it was hollow, empty. How could I tell him? How could I explain the pain his actions had caused? How could I face him? The room felt suffocating, the silence unbearable. And then, the anonymous text from the morning, the message I couldn't shake, haunted me. I needed answers. I needed to know who had sent it, why they had sent it. I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb James, and made my way to the living room. The house was still, shadows dancing across the walls. Sitting down on the couch, I dialed the anonymous number. My heart pounded as the phone rang, each tone a reminder of the dread tightening around my chest. It rang longer than I expected, the silence amplifying my rising anxiety. And then, to my shock, someone picked up. It was CLA's husband, Mark. "Why did you send me that message?" My voice trembled, a mix of confusion and anger. I needed answers, but I wasn't sure I was ready for what I might hear. There was a pause on the line, a hesitation that spoke volumes, before Mark's voice broke the silence. It was low, tinged with bitterness I had never heard before. "I thought it was time you knew the truth," he said simply, but his words weighed heavily. "When did you find out?" I asked, desperate to understand why he, of all people, would be the one to tell me. Mark sighed, his tone filled with resignation. "I had my suspicions for a while. I confirmed it a few days ago. I saw them together, just like you did today." The sting of those words hit harder than I anticipated. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the casualness of it all, the way their deceit unraveled in plain sight, so easily. "Why tell me this way?" I asked. "Why not confront CLA or even James?" Mark's voice softened, and I could feel the pain radiating from him. "Because CLA has never been honest with me, not really. I knew she married me for my money, but I thought maybe there was something more. Eventually, I wanted to hurt her. The way she hurt me. Rip apart the facade she's been living with." His words sent a chill down my spine. A broken man, exacting revenge. But did he ever stop to think about how this would affect me? My family? My voice was barely a whisper as I asked, "Did you think about how this would affect me? Us? Our kids?" "I did," he admitted, his voice softening, remorse seeping into his words. "I'm sorry for the collateral damage. I didn't want to hurt you or your kids. You deserve better. All of you." His apology was hollow, a flimsy attempt to excuse the pain he had caused. There was silence between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Both of us lost in our own grief. I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for him. Not now. Not when I was drowning in my own heartbreak. Is that supposed to make me feel better? I finally asked, the words bitter on my tongue. Not really expecting an answer. Not really wanting one. Mark's voice cracked. No! I guess not. His voice trembled, filled with a quiet, painful acceptance. But maybe, in time, we can both find some peace, knowing the truth. Maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild something from the ruins, he said, though even he seemed unsure of what that meant. Even if it's not what we had before. The line clicked off. And then, silence. The kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and suffocating. I was left with nothing but the faint echoes of his words and the weight of his sorrow that hung between us like an unspoken promise. The night stretched on, endless and heavy, as though time itself had slowed. Mark's pain, though understandable, had dragged me unwillingly into his battle, forcing me into a role I never sought, one of an avenger in his marital drama. A drama that now exposed raw wounds in my own life, wounds that might never truly heal. I sat motionless, the phone still clutched in my hand, staring into the thick darkness. The truth was out now, a bitter, jagged pill. It didn't offer comfort. No solace. Only more questions, more uncertainty. The daunting task of navigating what was left of my marriage, my friendship, it all seemed insurmountable. As dawn began to break, the first rays of light casting a pale glow into the room, I realized the path ahead would be a difficult one. Forgiveness seemed as distant as the last stars retreating into the morning sky. Trust, once shattered, loomed before me like an insurmountable wall. But in that moment of fragile clarity, as the day began to wake, I knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, I had to face it. The consequences. The decisions. It all started with facing the day, head on. The sleep that followed was restless, haunted by the echoes of betrayal, a night of turmoil that weighed on my chest like a crushing stone. It was hard to breathe, harder still to think. But despite the chaos inside me, I had made a decision the night before, an uncomfortable one, but one that had to happen. I needed to talk to James. Face to face. No more distractions. No more distance. We needed to resolve this mess, together, or at least begin to. I planned to meet him that night, after the kids were asleep. A time when we could speak without interruption. With resolve, I reached for my phone, ready to send him a simple message confirming our meeting. But when the screen lit up, I was met not with the calm of a home screen, but with a flood of notifications. A storm of alerts that immediately set my nerves on edge. Curiosity mixed with dread. I opened the social media app, desperate to understand the source of the commotion. What I saw made my heart stop in my chest. A video, unmistakably featuring James and CLA in a deeply compromising, intimate moment. The video had been posted by an anonymous account, but there was no mistaking it. The content was explicit. Devastating. And there it was, for all the world to see. Our private agony, our humiliation, exposed to everyone. I knew instantly, it was Mark. The vindictiveness in his voice the night before, the raw pain, painted a picture of a man desperate for revenge. He wasn't just trying to reclaim his dignity, he was out for destruction. His act of exposing our affair in such a cruel, public way was not one of justice, but of annihilation. As I stood there, frozen, staring at the screen, disbelief rippling through me, my phone rang. A sharp, insistent buzz that seemed to shake me from my stupor. The urgency of it echoed the chaos now spreading around me. Journalists. Friends. Acquaintances. The scandal was everywhere. News was traveling fast, like wildfire, and everyone wanted a piece of it. A comment. A reaction. My hands trembled as I whispered, "Oh my God," into the empty room. It was all falling apart, faster than I could process. The conversation I had planned with James, meant to be a private, intimate affair, one that might have saved whatever was left of our marriage, was now irrelevant. The world had barged in, uninvited, cruel, and merciless. My heart pounded as I tried to grasp the enormity of what was happening. This was no longer a personal betrayal. It was a public spectacle, and the unraveling had only just begun. With shaking hands, I dialed James's number. His voice answered quickly, taut with tension, as if he had already felt the tremors of the disaster unfolding. "Have you seen it?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. "Yes, I've seen it," he replied, his voice thick with regret, yet something darker, fear, perhaps, hung in the air. "I'm so sorry. This isn't how I wanted it." "How you wanted it?" I cut him off, unable to contain the rage and hurt that flooded through me. "How was this ever supposed to end, James? For me to find out like this? For everything to fall apart this way?" There was a long pause on the other end, the silence heavy and thick with the weight of our broken world. "I'm coming home," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk. Face to face. We need to figure out what to do about everything." The call ended, leaving me spiraling in a storm of emotions. I knew that whatever came next would be nothing short of a nightmare. Public humiliation. Family betrayal. The wreckage of what was once our life. The hours until James returned stretched on painfully, each minute feeling like an eternity. How do you confront a betrayal that's been thrust into the public eye, turning your life into a circus? How do you reclaim any semblance of normalcy when everything sacred has been torn apart and put on display? When James finally stepped through the door that evening, his expression told me all I needed to know. He, too, was devastated by the exposure, by the betrayal, by everything that had unraveled in such a short time. We sat across from each other, the weight of our unspoken words pressing down like a physical force. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was about our children, our families, and the permanent scars this scandal would leave on all of us. What followed was a painful, necessary conversation. We discussed what immediate steps we needed to take to protect our privacy, how to deal with the media, and, most importantly, how to talk to our children. The idea of legal action against Mark for the invasion of our privacy and the dissemination of the video came up, but at that moment, it was just a faint whisper against the overwhelming noise of our collapsing lives. Decisions about the future of our marriage loomed, but that was for another time. For now, we had to manage the crisis, protect our family from the fallout, and begin the long, grueling process of healing, whatever that might look like. Then, after we had started to address the fallout, I knew there was one more call I had to make. Despite the anger, despite the hurt, I knew I had to contact Mark. If there was any chance of salvaging what little privacy we had left, I had to act quickly. Finding a quiet corner in the chaos of a house, my hands shaking, I dialed Mark's number. The phone rang, each tone reverberating in the emptiness of the room. When he finally answered, his voice was cold, distant. "Mark, please," I pleaded, my voice desperate. "You have to take down the video. Think about my sons. Think about what this will do to them if they see it." There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost feel him weighing his options, the bitterness in his breath palpable through the line. "I posted that video for a reason," he said finally, his voice firm, resolved. "I understand you're hurt," I continued, my voice trembling. "But my children have nothing to do with this. They're innocent. Please, don't let them suffer because of our mistakes." Mark's voice softened, just a touch. "You think I want to hurt children?" he asked. "You think I haven't thought about that?" I pressed on, my voice steady despite the storm inside. They could lose friends, be bullied. Their whole world could change. And once something is on the internet, it's there forever. Another silence. This one felt longer, the weight of it pressing harder. I held my breath, hoping that somehow, my words had reached him. That he would remember the man he once was before bitterness consumed him. Mark, the man who had once been consumed by the need for revenge, spoke again, but this time his voice faltered, less certain than before. I don't want to hurt your kids. I don't, he admitted, and his words carried a heaviness, a realization dawning on him, one that seemed to widen his understanding of the consequences, perhaps for the first time. His eyes softened, yet the tension still lingered. But Claire and James, he continued, his voice lowering, they did this, not me. They did, and they're the ones who will have to deal with it. I felt the weight of his words, but I refused to let them derail my purpose. I assure you, Mark, my children shouldn't have to bear this burden. Please, do this for them, take the video down. Our conversation stretched on, small talk woven through my attempts to humanize the situation. I told him about Ethan, how he was flourishing at school, and how he found a new love for soccer. I shared how Lucas, with his quiet resilience, was navigating a complex family life with a maturity beyond his years. I spoke of the challenges they faced, not abstract issues, but real moments, real children. These were their lives that hung in the balance. Each word was my plea for Mark to see the humanity, to recognize that this wasn't just some digital battlefield, it was about two little boys caught in the middle. Mark hesitated. I could hear the struggle in his voice. Finally, he relented. Okay, he said, his tone mixed with defeat and a strange clarity, I'll take it down. Not for James or Claire, but for the kids. Relief surged through me, but it was tempered by an unsettling knowledge. The video may be erased from the online world, but the damage had already been done. The rumors had taken root. Conversations had started. The digital mark, though now less visible, would remain. The fallout, our lives, had already been affected in ways we couldn't undo. Hanging up, I sat in silence for a moment, a sigh of relief mingling with the heavy realization of what lay ahead. How would we face our friends, our family? How could I explain such adult failures to my children, to Ethan, to Lucas? The weight of it all pressed on my chest, suffocating me with each breath. The puzzle pieces of how to break the news to them, how to answer their inevitable questions, felt scattered, unattainable. The days to come were daunting. My marriage, once my safe harbor, had been shattered by betrayal. The very foundation of my life now lay in ruins, and the road ahead felt like a minefield, each step filled with potential for further pain. The morning after my conversation with Mark, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from James. His presence, always larger than life, felt distant now, muted. He handed me the divorce papers, his eyes avoiding mine, his movement slow, almost reluctant. I think it's best if we do this, he said quietly, his voice tight, almost breaking. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve your feelings anymore. The finality of his words hit me harder than anything he had said before. The air in the room thickened. I looked at the divorce papers, cold and unyielding, a reminder of what we had lost and what we could never regain. A part of me had hope for reconciliation, not just for us, but for our children, for Ethan and Lucas. But as I looked at James, his face drawn and defeated, I knew the path ahead was one we would walk separately. With a heavy heart, I signed the papers. Each stroke of my name felt like a silent farewell to the years we had shared, to the life we had dreamed of, to the family we once were. There was no contesting it. I asked for primary custody of our sons, knowing that their stability would be the one thing I could offer them in the midst of this storm. James, too, agreed without hesitation, his guilt carving deeper lines into his already weary face. Once everything was legally settled, I moved with Ethan into a modest apartment nearby. It wasn't much, but it was ours to rebuild, ours to make new memories in. A fresh start away from the shadows of our past, though the ghosts of betrayal still lingered in the corners of my mind. Meanwhile, Claire's world unraveled in ways I never could have predicted. Her affair with James had set off a chain of events that no one could stop. Mark, driven by a mix of vindication and revenge, ensured Claire wouldn't get any of the wealth from their divorce. Armed with evidence of her infidelity, he made sure she was left with nothing, no house, no money, no future. But the story didn't end there. The news broke of Claire's arrest, a corporate corruption scandal that tainted not just her personal life but her professional one as well. The same unethical behavior that had destroyed her marriage had seeped into her work, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. While a small part of me felt vindicated, a bigger part of me felt a profound sadness. She had so much potential, so much promise. And now, it was all destroyed. As for me, I began the painful process of rebuilding. The divorce, though it left scars, also allowed me to focus solely on my children. Raising Ethan became my priority, while I worked hard to ensure that Lucas, though he lived with James, would never feel left out of our lives. The biggest challenge, however, was the impact on Ethan. The absence of his father was a struggle he couldn't fully grasp. James tried to visit, took Ethan out on weekends, but the natural rhythm of our family life had been broken, replaced by a disjointed pattern of scheduled visits and shared custody. At just 5 years old, Ethan couldn't understand why his world had shifted so dramatically. He would ask when his father was coming home, and on the days when he realized that the home he had known was gone, his confusion turned to quiet sorrow. Seeing my son grapple with those feelings broke me. Despite the anger and betrayal I still harbored for James, I encouraged Ethan to maintain his relationship with his father. I believe that the issues between James and me shouldn't taint the bond between father and son. We agreed to family therapy to help Ethan adjust, and while it helped, the road to healing would be long and uncertain. In this new chapter, I had to be both mother and father, trying to fill the void left by James's absence. But I also had to confront my own healing. I had to find a way to forgive, not for James, but for me, for Ethan. As time passed, my focus shifted. I threw myself into my work, strengthening bonds with friends and family who supported me. Their kindness was a steady source of comfort, and I clung to it as I navigated this painful, unpredictable journey. The scars of the past month would never fully fade, but I began to find hope again. Life, despite its trials, also holds the promise of new beginnings. For Ethan, for Lucas, and for me. One day at a time, I clung to the belief that, with love, resilience, and courage, we would rebuild. And in time, we would find peace, and maybe even happiness again.